Hi, and welcome to the Tarot Masterclass. Hope you're enjoying the course so far and hope you're finding time to reflect upon each of the cards between each class, each session. Today, or this month, we are focusing on the Empress and the Emperor. Um, Now, we're trying to do two cards together, and as I say, some of the lessons will be a single card, some will be two cards, and there's a reason for that, you'll see. But these two cards actually, I feel, fit together nicely to talk about. So, with no further ado, welcome to the lesson. Welcome to your Tarot Masterclass, and we're going to start with the Empress cards, which are beautifully displayed there. On the left, you've got the Pamela Coleman Smith and Arthur Waite card, and on the right, you have the Empress as perceived by Lady Frida Harris in the Aleister Crowley Thoth deck. The styles are very different, as you'll begin to recognize between these two sets of cards, but the elements are the same. Okay, and we'll go into a bit more detail about that in a moment. Of course, the Emperor card, I've just swapped them around a bit there. The Thoth Tarot is on the left, and the Pamela Coleman Smith Tarot is on the right. So these are cards 3 and 4 in the tarot deck. And we're going to unpick some of the symbolism here. And if you read the lesson that goes with this, you'll be able to get a more detailed um, idea of the symbols on these cards. I'd like to remind you that each of these cards and each of the things that I say are taken from the what I understand of the cards designers, the intention behind the design, and what I understand from various connections that I've made. You have to make your connections, and you don't have to agree with me. My aim in this course is not to teach you the tarot, but to offer insights for you to explore the tarot. And in exploring the tarot, you will begin to make your own connections with it, which is vitally important. I was reflecting the other day that, I've already said in this course that I started with my tarot deck when I was about 13 or so, maybe 14, which actually means I've been working with the tarot for half a century. That's 50 years. And that's a kind of sobering thought. And here's the thing about that. Even though I've had decks of cards and played with them and explored them for 50 years or more, I still think I'm only scratching the surface of the potential. Probably more about that a bit later. So let's recap. We are aware of the fool, and we're aware that the fool is actually making the journey. And the way that we're looking at it, this is that the fool stands on the edge of the cliff, ready to jump off, and takes an exciting journey. The first character the fool will meet on the journey is the magician. And the magician, if you remember, I just remember that the magician is the person that has the will to act. And I think that's an interesting idea. Magic has often been defined as the ability or the art and science of bringing about change in accordance with will. And indeed, that means you have to explore what will is. And we'll be doing more of that later on in the course. But once the magician has actually willfully started the journey or started the action, the high priestess comes along and tends to balance the action. If you remember, the high priestess sits between two pillars, pillars of judgment, pillars of wisdom, and she is balancing the action before she lets it through those pillars into this wonderful space where things are manifest. The next two cards, the Empress and the Emperor, are interesting in the sense that the Emperor um, sort of, the Empress, sorry, takes the will and the action and nurtures it. So it's a different level. The Empress now starts to nurture and allow the will and the action to gestate. And then she gives birth to that action, and the magician, sorry, and then the emperor will start to guide the whatever has been produced. It's one way to think about this. So the fool takes the journey, the magician acts with will and an intention. The high priestess adds understanding and balances that with wisdom. The empress gestates and nurtures that idea to give birth to it, and the emperor then contains, controls, and supports and manages it. Okay. Now, the empress and the emperor, as far as I'm concerned, are the first two cards that really reflect the material plane. I think the Fool and the Magician and the Empress are on a more esoteric or spiritual plane. The Empress and the Emperor are acting in the material world. They're connected because as we know through the ancient teachings of as above, so below, they are interconnected. But we're talking about material effects of spiritual actions. Okay. And that's one way to think about it. No doubt you will come up with your own ways as you explore. So, as ever, okay, you're going to start by looking. We are not very good observers by naturally. We filter out so much based upon our beliefs and our kind of perceptual limitations and the way that we seek to understand. If we take time to really look, more things would jump out at us. And as you've been doing over the last couple of months, that you've been asked to look at the dominant colors or patterns. Look at the largest, most prominent object or objects. Look at the background. The background is really important. And then notice any other things and notice what actions are being taken. And use your journal to look at these things and to note these things. Look, one of the challenges I've found that some students have, some learners have, is they get themselves a very nice journal and they think that what they write in the journal needs to be final and polished. On the contrary, what goes into your journal needs to be formative. It needs to be exploratory. And so your journal should be full of notes, and the pages don't have to read like a novel or a book. It reads a series of inspirations that, if you choose to, you can formalize much later. But your journal is the place to capture your thoughts. Okay, you may want to find ways of cross-referencing things within your journal, and that's where maybe highlighter pens or some clever numbering system comes in. Or if you're using an electronic journal, you may like to tag the various pages so you can look back. I would suggest use mind maps to make these connections, but that's down to you. Your journal is a notebook. It's a notebook of your inspirations, your discoveries, your knowledge, and any information you can glean from other sources. And it's a working book. So when you put at the top of your journal page, the Empress, and you start to think about all of these things, the first thing that should be underneath is a series of immediate things you notice. Okay. And then the more detailed stuff can be added as we go through and you become more and more familiar with each of the cards. Having said that, I am hoping that in 2 months' time, 3 months' time, you will revisit the Empress, you will revisit the High Priestess, you'll revisit the Magician and the Fool in order to see how they're fitting within a story. And that story is the story that you will be telling of your journey through the cards. So we'll start by looking at the Empress. What are we noticing here? Well, I'm not going to talk you through all of this just yet, but you will notice there is this youngish figure that is sitting on a red throne. She is robed and she has a white and flower patterned robe on. There may be the sense that her tummy is slightly swelling. In some versions of the Empress card, she is obviously pregnant and ready to give birth. In other versions of the card, she is subtly pregnant. Um, Notice also that the background sky is yellow, and then behind her we have the trees, the vegetation, and in front of her we have ears of corn. It's a cornfield that's growing. All of these things have specific meanings. Notice that down by her side is a shield, but the shield is important because it's heart shaped. It has the symbol of Venus on it, the glyph, the astrological glyph, and she's holding a, uh, a sort of scepter on top of which is a ball. It's a green ball. Um, Again, you may want to notice these things. You may notice other things, and these cards are there for you to reflect upon and reflect upon with the notes that you've got. Some of the things that you may immediately notice are the things I've just mentioned, that she's yellow background, she's wearing a crown that's yellow or gold. She has white, red robes with flowers. She's on a red throne or seat, and there are green trees and vegetation around her. Those are the main colors that are sticking out. Um, you know, and if we think of what red means to you and to me, perhaps, and what sitting on a red cushion may suggest, well, immediately it's royalty. Um, and she's obviously pausing in her actions, she's reflecting in her actions. So, what's the story? A regal woman sitting on an earthly throne. She is powerful and fertile with the suggestion of being pregnant. Very faint in this card, but in other cards you may see it obviously. She is connected to and with nature. Crucial point. Notice that the robe flows into nature. Okay. Is she perhaps Gaia or Mother Earth? Okay. Notice also to the right of her, you may have missed it, but flowing through the woodland is a stream. Interesting, a stream. And notice specifically her crown. How many stars are there? Did you look at that? Have a look now. Pause this video to have a look. The crown has got 12 stars on it. Yes, why 12 stars? 12 signs of the zodiac, perhaps. The scepter with the green sphere. Is she holding a representation of material earth? The shield is heart-shaped with the sign of Venus and corn in the foreground, as we mentioned. Corn and goddesses are often, they're linked in sort of pagan traditions. So maybe you'd like to explore that. The corn is ripening, the corn is fertile. Exactly what this card is about, preparing to give birth to. And so when you come to find your meaning for this card, your key words that you're going to explore for the meeting, you have to start to look at the symbolism, start with your initial reactions, as always, and then move on to discerning the symbolic references. Why the zodiac, for example? What's corn got to do with it? What the hell is that stream going through the forest all about? And who is the Empress? Who would you identify with it as the Empress? If you are familiar with pagan traditions, you may identify with her as a specific goddess. You may choose to identify with Gaia, but you may choose to identify with just an earthly Empress who sits in a way that is connected to and growing with nature. Venus, that's her shield. Maybe you need to have a look about some of the myths around Venus. So, Emperor, if we take the same kind of approach with the Emperor, just look at that for a moment. And I don't insist, I suggest that you shut me up for a while and pause the video to look carefully at these cards. I'm obviously not giving you enough time to make your own connections to these cards. I'm driving you through a little bit, but come back and look and watch. And if you have a tarot deck, which I hope you've now purchased, if it's the Rider-Waite deck, look for the stuff. If it's the Thoth deck, look for what we talk about. If it's any other deck of cards out of the 2,500 that are currently available, then you may need to look a bit more carefully at the symbolism, but it's going to be there. It will obviously be shaped by the mythic themes within each of the decks. So if it's Arthurian, there'll be links to the Arthurian mythos. If it's Golden Dawn, it'll be linked to the Golden Dawn magical system. If it's the Robin Wood tarot, it'll be linked to the forestry and ideas of Robin Wood. If it's the Druid tarot, it'll be firmly tied to Druid tradition, and so on. I would strongly advise that if you're using a deck of cards that's heavily drawing on another tradition, you're going to have to work a little bit harder to make the connections. So I would advise getting a Rider-Waite deck or a Thoth deck as your study deck. The information is transferable from one deck to another, but because I'm talking about these two decks, you will see things more clearly. So there's the Emperor. I hope you had a look at it. What are the main colours? Well, red, russet background or an orangey background. There's orange or yellow mountains. He's wearing a red robe of authority, perhaps. Underneath the robe, however, is silver armour and sitting on a grey stone carved throne. Something interesting about that. It's a grey throne. It's carved in stone, so therefore there are some interesting connections or links you might want to make there. Traditionally, certainly in the UK, kings were crowned by standing on or sitting on a particular stone, and they still are. The scone stone. Well, look at that and think about that. The armor underneath the garments. The armor is obviously he's ready for battle. He may look relaxed, but he's ready for battle, and he will go and defend whatever he believes with or whatever he is protecting. Okay, we're getting an idea now. If the Empress is giving birth to something, he is going to protect it, and in some ways could protect it too much. And there's a fine balance here between protection and oppression, or protection and restriction. So think about these ideas. So there's the story. A ruler sits on the throne. He wears a robe with armor. He's always ready for action. He holds a staff with the Tau cross on it. The staff, there it is, looks got T with a circle above it. It's been described as the Tau cross, but it's very, very close to an ankh, which is a symbol of life. And in his other hand, he has an orb. What's that? And again, think about, certainly in the UK, traditions and symbols of kingship or rulership. And if you really want to go back, look at symbols of rulership within the East as well. And you will find possessions of artifacts that look like staffs, are orbs, and it's a common feature. So this emperor is clearly a leader and a ruler. The crown, let's go back to that. What else is in this? Well, look, there are a number of ram's heads. The chair actually has 4 ram's heads on it. If you're into your astrology, you will know the ram is the symbol of Aries. So the emperor is allied to the zodiac sign of Aries, the first sign in the zodiac. Is a crown, but notice the crown not only has jewels on it, but it has an infinity symbol at its crest. So this ruler is a connection to infinity, is aware of the infinity. Got the tail cross in the background. There are mountains. The mountains are the mountains that he has climbed to settle the land? Are they mountains that he is actually going to eventually explore, or has he explored them? There is a blue ribbon behind the throne, and that blue ribbon is actually a stream, and that stream is his connection and defense of the feminine. Ooh, interesting. And there's some cases you will find a camel there. You may not, but in some cards you may find a camel, which links him back to earlier cards. So you got to find the meaning. Start with your initial reactions, move on to the symbolic references, understand the mystical references research, and ask yourself, who is the emperor? And if you ask yourself that question in a material sense, like with the Empress, you can think of examples of physical emperors and empresses, if that's a good word, that have ruled. We could all think of emperors, think of some of the Roman emperors, but also link back in history, biblical history. Think of King Solomon, for example, who was said to be the wisest of all. I just want to go back for a moment. I mentioned that sometimes there's a camel here. It doesn't exist in this deck, so I don't want to make you go nuts looking for it. However, in some of the decks you have, you will see the camel because it links back to the earlier cards. But in this one, there is no camel, so don't go nuts looking for it. So, who is the emperor? And that brings us, I'll pause there for a moment. There's a lot there. And again, if you just take my words and you reflect upon them, then read um, the, the blurb that's on the lesson, and then come back to them again, you will start to make connections. Any connection you personally make is valid. All right. Now, some people, as experienced, might want to put a king in the place of the emperor, which is perfectly fine. And they want to think of specific kings, which is also fine. Because as we're building a series of reference points, you will define your own meanings and keywords from your explorations and knowledge. And one of the reasons for me why the tarot so long has been a 50-year plus journey is that my thoughts about them change and they evolve. And that's what they should do. Nothing is fixed. And that's the problem with using a guidebook that tells you what each card means. Because it doesn't allow you to develop your own connections with the cards. Now, I'm going to say something a bit later on that might seem contrary to what I've just said. So when we get there, hold fire and roll with it. So this is the Thoth deck. This is Lady Frida Harris's beautiful Empress. Very different kind of concept and construct. But I think you'll sense the femininity in this card, the waves of the fact that this is a very feminine lady. And with all of the Crowley deck specifically, where the name of the card is, you can see at the bottom it says trumps. Usually on the left there is a Hebrew letter, and on the right there is an astrological symbol or a planetary symbol. I don't want to get too hung up on these now, but if I'm going to introduce something a bit later, but the depth of the Crowley cards starts to shine when you start to understand those little symbols in the bottom of the card. Okay, so what are we looking at here? What are the main colors? Well, there's shades of blue in the background. She's looking backwards and possibly into an opening that is supported by the light of a crown. She's wearing a red bodice that's got flowers on, a green dress. She has a green shield with a white dragon on it, or if that's what you want to call it. And she has a pink shield and a swan. So what's going on? What is the story here? What else is there? There are two crescent moons. There are lotus flowers. There's a lunar crown. She's wearing that lunar crown with the circle and the cross above it, which actually is materialism over spirituality, if you want to look at it that way. And there's a dragon or a griffin. So again, each of these symbols are there for a purpose. One thing to get your head around is that in the two tarot cards that we're looking at, the Thoth and the Fried and the Pamela Coleman Smith and Rider Waite deck, nothing is drawn just for decoration. Within the decoration, there is meaning, and it's a bit of a detective work to pull out the meaning sometimes, but it's well worth the journey. And that's why when I ask you to find meaning in the card, you really have to look, right? You need to look at the mystical reference or the mystical research and ask the question, who is the Empress? Think about when these cards were drawn, or shall we say created. Are they referring to things of the time in which they were drawn? We know, for example, and more about this later, that certainly with Pamela Coleman Smith's cards, that is the Rider Waite cards, within the minor arcana, she drew some of her friends, even her cat appear in some of the cards. They meant something to her, but they have a different significance as well. So as you look at this card, what significance do you get just by the flowing lines of the female form? What do you get from that? The fact that the crescent moons have spheres around them that touch, and the lotus flowers above her heart. These are all there for reasons that you need to explore. As with the Emperor, that card is just red, isn't it? It's kind of yellow, red, orange, but it's very interesting when we start to look at the Emperor. I'll let you look at it for a few moments or pause the video and look. Okay, so some of the elements that you've seen in the Pamela Smith deck, the Emperor there, are here. The ram's heads are here. But notice there's also a lamb and there's a shield and there's all sorts going on there. What do you notice? So what are the main colors? Well, all I can put there is it's kind of red, orange, and yellow. It's kind of like wolf. And when you put this card next to the uh, Empress card in this deck, you get this real mix of the calm blues and fiery reds, right? Makes perfect sense. Okay, calm blues and fiery reds. If you remember from the previous deck, we know that the Emperor is Aries. Oh, surprise! There's the Rams again. But there's something else. There's actually, a number of rams or sheeps in that picture we'll come on to. So what's the story? Well, a king sits on the throne. It's a fiery, energetic space to be. He's trying to contain himself from rushing forward. He sits cross-legged, and it looks like the figure four. Oh, yeah, which is card number 4. As we'll see much, much later, a card called the Hanged Man is virtually a reverse image of the figure with the 4 upside down. And one of the ways to think about those two cards, just to hint at what's coming, is the Emperor is seen as control and the Hangman is actually lack of control. Very interesting. He has a staff and an orb of rulership, the orb with the Maltese cross. At his shoulders are 2 wild rams behind which there is a sort of there is a fiery sky. At his feet, there's a lamb, and the lamb has a flag, and the lamb is relaxing or recumbent. Does that suggest the rams that are behind him have been tamed? by his actions, or calmed by his actions, or soothed. Need to think about that. Um, but he's obviously, you know, in control. The shield is also interesting. It's a similar shield to what the high priestess had, but the shield is more fiery, and behind it is a red dot or a red sun, a fire source again. Notice his tunic has got all kinds of symbols on it, flowers or insects or bees. Have a think about that. Um, there's so much in this card that I would like you to start exploring it. We are going to revisit some of this stuff later. So in your journal, you can go back and reflect even more. That's the point of your journal. Um, I'd like just you to think about the two orbs that are to the left and right of him, where the pillars and the high priestess would have existed. They are kind of little orbs with designs on them. It might be worth reflecting what you think those are. And maybe I will suggest something later, or something that it will be suggested later that you might like to think about. So there's the ram and flag. There's the ram's head on the staff. Did you miss that one? The staff has got a ram's head on. And there's an orb with the Maltese cross on top of it. And there are two spheres containing flames. Well, are they flames or are they something else? And all the symbols on his robe. These are things to notice. Make your mind up what they are. When you have a deck of cards, look closely at the deck of cards to see what you find. And then it's about the meaning. Always start with your initial reactions. Even if that reaction is don't like that card, or like that card, or love that design, um, those initial reactions are really important. They may suggest that if you really love a card, that's areas in your own psyche, if you like, that are developed. And if you reject a card, maybe it's elements in your psyche that need exploring. Whenever I go to buy a deck of cards, and I've got several decks of cards, one of the cards I'm always drawn to, and actually sometimes frames whether I'm going to buy that deck or not, is the star. I'm sure that says a lot about me, but wait till we get there and you might find out. So start with your initial reactions and then start to look at the symbols, aren't you? Like I've done in the notes for you, I'd list the symbols. And what I've offered as interpretation of the symbols, you may want to reject because you do some research and find something different. And then you can tell me. Made a mistake here. It says, who is the high priestess? Whoops. It should say, who is uh, the emperor? So, see, that's me not being in control of my PowerPoint slide and missing it. I maybe need some more emperor's energy to actually make sure I do things totally correctly. So, when it comes to reflecting on the cards as a whole now, there are ways that the tarot cards can be used. The way that most people come to the tarot is to use them in, I'm going to call it fortune telling or divination. And that for me is the most basic and lowest use of these cards. In fact, the tarot deck, as we know it today, probably was not designed for fortune telling. So when you go to a New Age festival and somebody's going to read your cards, it might be worth thinking about what they're actually doing. I believe that the best way to use tarot cards is in self reflection. As I've just said, if a card appeals to you, why? If a card doesn't appeal to you, why not? Those are important things for you to journal, okay? Because you'll learn so much about yourself. The tool is for self reflection. Crowley, when he wrote about the Thoth Tarot, about tarot full stop, actually said that the tarot, the use of the tarot for giving other people readings, is a byproduct of everything else. And he had uh, a really interesting way of claiming that he did some readings. Now, I can't prove this, I never saw him do readings, but in his writings, he said that he would find a card that would represent the person asking the question. And in these cases, it would be a court card from the minor arcana. He'd find that card, then they get the card shuffled, and then he'd deal out a certain number of cards. If the court card that he had assigned to the person asking the question didn't come up, he wouldn't do the reading. Okay. Um, because readings for cards, off the cards, is a small skill. Crowley designed the Thoth deck, and Pamela Coleman Smith designed the Rider-Waite deck, Pamela the Smith Rider-Waite deck, as a kind of initiatory tool. These were meant to be understood in a far more esoteric rather than mundane sense. Yeah. And the Crowley deck in particular, which is the Lady Frida Harris designs, could be called an encyclopedia of esoteric wisdom because the symbolism within the cards are reflective of many ideas in terms of alchemy, in terms of magic, in terms of what we know as esoteric or Gnostic laws. They are that way because both decks of cards, both sets of cards, were used within the spiritual or religious structures that these two gentlemen were part of. In fact, the two ladies were also part of it. And the initiatory tool aspect of it really speaks to the idea that you are the fool going through a journey of initiation from beginning to end through the 22 major cards. Now, I know, and you know by now, that the tarot cards aren't ancient. You know, they evolved in the 1500s, perhaps, initially as a game called Tarocchi, which was like a game of trumps. And the major cards were actually created to be major trumps and were often drawn to depict the people or very rich people that were in society, and even some people who owned or commissioned the decks. However, Crowley and Arthur Waite, particularly because of their involvement in magic and the occult, saw the possibility of making other links with the cards that may not have existed prior to their identifying it. I think it's a fascinating idea to track back some of the cards into, let's, for example, say Jewish mysticism and how much Jewish mysticism involved and symbols came into play in the um, design of the cards. Now, you have some choices to make. Yeah, you can listen to these talks and go and do. You can just learn the cards with their keyword meanings and the connections you've created, and you can certainly use them as divination tool. I'm hoping that you'll use them for self-reflection. Some of you, and I'm hoping that's the majority, will really start to use this set of decks, a set of cards, as a tool to initiate yourself into the mysteries, because that's what's open to you. As we go through the course, I'm going to try to explore both of the ideas. Let's call them the mundane, simplistic ideas, the divination, if you like, but the more refined self-reflection, self-initiation, study of Eastern wisdom. Okay, and you can accept both, or you can reject one in favor of the other. I personally think that both are valid. And just on the word of readings, you're getting to the point. If people find out you're studying or working with the tarot, one of the things that they will end up saying is, "Do us a reading then." And please feel free, feel free to get them to take a card and just talk freely about what you picture in the card and see if you can make relevance to them. Um, we're going to talk a lot about this later on in the course, but for me, the reading isn't coming from a spiritual source necessarily. A reading like that is coming from your intuitive understandings of the cards as well as the practical understandings, but intuitive understandings which gives you uh, a connection to, let's call it a collective unconscious for the moment. And when you're truly in the zone doing this reading, what happens is you don't end up just describing the card, you end up connecting to a specific question or issue. That's not the cards aren't doing that. You are doing that. There's no inherent power in the cards. So forget all those horror movies. You use the cards as a key to your own subjective understanding of the symbolism, which is why the richer your dictionary of symbolism, the richer your understanding of some of the mysteries behind the cards, the more powerful connections you can make. These cards will open up doorways within your unconscious to allow information through. And do I say this now? Well, yeah, I will say it now. You might like to practice, and I know at the moment we've only looked at um, was it 5 cards, but each month you're going to get another card added to that, maybe 2 or 3 cards in some months. Look at a card and try to identify a person in your life that reminds you of that card. And then check out the keywords in your journal for that card and see if that person actually has any of those qualities. You might surprise yourself to find that they do. Um, so, a little teaser, you can do tarot readings without tarot cards if you understand the patterns of the cards well enough. That's one. And the second teasing, if you are really interested in ritual and magic, some of the tarot cards themselves will replace all those ritual items that you might need to connect and you think you need on an altar. In fact, there are several writers and authors and workers with the tarot who actually believe that the tarot deck itself can be used to create whatever kind of altar you want. I believe that, and I feel that, and I sense that because the tarot is for self reflection, self initiation, and contains, by accident as well as design, some very powerful esoteric wisdom, which takes us on to the start of some of this wisdom. I'm not going to dwell too much on it, but the minor arcana, the sort of cards that are left after you take out the 22 trumps, are designed in 4 suits. We know that they are wands, cups, swords, and pentacles. If you've looked at the minor cards at all, I know we haven't focused on them yet. We will be looking at them in a rather interesting way later on. But those cards, wands, cups, swords, and pentacles, link to the 4 major elements: fire, water, air, and earth. Forget the diagram underneath there, the little sort of circular diagram. Some of you may know what that is, and I'm going to mention that later. But there's a Jewish system that maintains there are 4 worlds: the world of wands, water, wands, cups, swords, and airs, or Atziluth, Beriah, Yetzirah, and Asaya, or the world of emanation, where divine thoughts come from, the world of creation, where things happen, the world of formation, when things are created, and the world of manifestation. Now, think about those words particularly: emanation, rays of possibility; creation, weaving the rays of creation; formation, forming it like in a cauldron, cooking it, and then manifesting and serving it up. And those 4 worlds are really, really interesting. And we're going to come back to them. But if this side of the tarot interests you, I really recommend you go and have a look at the occult course, which is running in parallel with this. The occult course is actually about more deeply about ritual and magic. And the first 5 lessons are about the elements of earth, air, fire, water, and spirit. And they're there to reflect on. And these courses overlap beautifully in the sense that tarot, for me, is a textbook of occult ideas. What's important here, apart from everything else, and this is probably overload, but stay with it, is each of those elements are connected to a Jewish letter. So what fire is Yod, water is He, air is Vow, and earth is He. When said together, it's Yod, He, Vow, He. My ancient Hebrew is not that brilliant, but there's something very important about those 4 letters, which we'll come on to in a moment. For those of you who really want to explore this stuff, there's all of the major cards linked across various lettering systems, including the various bits of astrology which you come across. So if you really want to study this table, have a look. I wouldn't get too hung up on it yet because a lot of this stuff evolves naturally, but I thought I'd share it here because then you can see that there's a set of correspondences with every card across lots of different systems. But that funny little diagram is known as the Tree of Life, which comes from the Jewish mystery tradition known as the Kabbalah. Again, if you're a follower of the Moots and you subscribe to the Moots and you subscribe to the downloads of the Moots, you know we did a kind of talk about the Kabbalah and a talk about the Tarot, which is basic ideas here. But all we need to think about at the moment is in the Tree of Life, the Kabbalah, this magical system. It really is a map or a plan of creation. So at the top of this tree, these spheres, there was the void, the great manifestation, the oneness that is God. And the first sphere, the first white sphere, was the revelation of the creative spark. And from that creative spark, the divine original, the other spheres were created in a descending order. So the white one is, if you like, pure spiritual energy, and the bottom brown one is material energy. No surprising, therefore, that the bottom brown one is earth. And although the Kabbalah has got Jewish origin, and even Jewish people who read the Torah and the Talmud may not go on to study the Kabbalah, but it's there, and certainly rabbis will have adopted this, understand this as a mystical system. But when it was being written about, and when, shall we say, medieval scholars were looking for frameworks to understand the universe, people came across this, and the Kabbalah was published, became very popular. And so it was adopted by Western occultists and mystics. They changed the name of the spelling. They changed the K for a Q, and there's all kinds of reasons for that, which I won't go into now. But it's on the podcast. Sorry, it's on the Moot download if you want to get there. But notice the pattern. There are 3 pillars. There's a left-hand side where the pillars have got a black, red, and a kind of orangey, earthy, browny colour. On the one on the right is white, blue, and green, and one straight down the middle, which actually is the white one to the brown one, earth. That's a representation in terms of the tarot of where the high priestess was sitting. She had the pillar on the left, the pillar on the right, and she was sitting in front of this pillar, which is the direct link from earth to spirituality. There are 10 spheres of manifestation, and interestingly, there are 22 paths that connect each of the spheres. Where does that number 22? Why does that ring a bell? There are 22 tarot trumps. Now, I'm not saying that ancient Jewish mystics use the tarot on the pathways, but initiatory systems like the Golden Dawn use the tarot pathways as meditation pathways to raise yourself from earth through to spirit in a structured way. The Golden Dawn had 10 degrees of training, 10 degrees of enlightenment, if you like, and that's how they measured their growth. I'm introducing this now, and you can bypass it, or you can say, oh, because I'm going to refer to it a few times as we go on from now, because really we're at the material level, and it's interesting to see how we connect material with the spiritual. If you really want to get into it for a moment, that's the tree of life with the tarot cards assigned to the various paths. Okay. Now it gets really complicated. And so for now, all I'd like you to think about is that the 22 tarot cards link to the 22 paths between the 10 spheres. On this diagram, you will see descriptions of the spheres, their name, both an English kind of translation and spiritual. If you're into your astrology, you will see that the spheres, each of those 10 spheres, is linked to a planet. And you may like to think about that. You may like to think about why the one right in the middle, 6, which is Tiferet, which means beauty, has got the sun to it, and why the one underneath has got the moon to it. By the way, the circle with the cross stands for Earth. Now, I'm not saying get into this too much now, but what I'm trying to do is show you there's a depth to the tarot card design, particularly the ones that were designed by members of the Golden Dawn, which are the two card decks we're looking at. There's a depth to these cards, which if you want to start mining, has some real gold within it. Yeah. This is where the tarot for self-development comes into focus, and the tarot for reading, if you like, stays away from this mostly. I firmly believe, by the way, if you understand the tarot in this more esoteric sense, your readings are richer, your personal occult philosophy changes in keeping with what you're learning. And yeah, I won't say any more. That's here just for you to be aware of. The diagram previously actually outlines the letter of the Jewish alphabet in the 5th column. The Jewish Hebrew letter, and tells you what it means. So if you look down here, Aleph, the fool is ox. Aleph, the first letter of Jewish there is for ox. And then you have Beth, which means house, Gimel, which means camel, Daleth, which means door, He, which means window, and so on. You could look down that list there, and maybe if you've got the Crowley Thoth deck, look at what these particular letters suggest for each of those cards as a deeper reference point. So there we go, the Kabbalah and the tarot on the tree of life. Up to you whether you want to explore this or whether you're going to stay at a different level. Now, I'm trying to say that I didn't come to this understanding of this overnight, right? I may have started with the tarot when I was 13, 14 as a series of pretty pictures. And if I hadn't have stumbled across Aleister Crowley's book, Magic in Theory and Practice, I would not necessarily have made the connections I made, and I would not have gone on the journey I've gone on. And the more I've looked into the tarot, it's given me an appreciation of where I can look for other powerful ideas, which is why I may have already mentioned at the start of this that I'm starting to believe that I can embrace meaningfully the descriptor occultist, because an occultist is somebody who seeks for hidden knowledge. That's all. It's not about black magic. It's not about, occult means hidden. And I think the tarot is a treasure trove which leads us to a wealth of hidden, esoteric, magical, mystical knowledge. And when you are able to consider different strands of this knowledge from different spiritual traditions, the insights that it gives you, I think, are valuable. But that's down to me, that's down to you. Next month, one card. Uh, we're going to look at the Hierophant next month. And the Hierophant is interesting. Again, I won't spend too much time looking at it now, but five. Card five is the Hierophant. And without spoiling it too much, you will actually see there's a strong connection here to the symbolism on the High Priestess and to the symbolism uh, of the Tree of Life we've just looked at. Until next month, have fun.